to be able to listen and hopefully learn a little bit. So let me see. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen now. And hopefully everybody's able to see this. All right, so is that appearing for everybody? You guys good? Okay. Um, so what I wanted to kind of talk about today is a little bit about, you know, about ADHD, but also with an idea of let's kind of explore maybe some of the parts that people don't necessarily already know, right? And so I'm gonna have to kind of move this out of the way. All right. Um, Dr. Russell Barkley, he's one of the major experts in the field of ADHD. And he had what I thought was a particularly ballsy quote where he said that ADHD is the most impairing mental health syndrome that is treated on an outpatient basis. All right. So pretty big gutsy statement because obviously our DSM is freaking humongous. There's a lot of different diagnoses in there. And so to say that this is the most impairing mental health syndrome treated on an outpatient basis, I think that's a pretty gutsy claim. So let's go ahead and kind of dive into the rest of his quote. He said, it is more impairing than anxiety, more impairing than depression, more impairing than substance abuse. The morbidity of untreated ADHD is profound. 25% of the prison population has undiagnosed ADHD. Most of the kids in the juvenile justice system have untreated ADHD. Traffic accidents are 8 times more common than with the general population. If you have ADHD, you are 40% more likely to get divorced than if you don't, and 30% more likely to be unemployed. Estimates run as high as 40% of the addicted population is having ADHD and a significant portion of the eating disordered population. So, all of that is to say that frequently when I am treating somebody for something that they've come in with, when I'm treating couples, families, kids, whatever, there are a lot of situations where I start to have that kind of like, you know, could there be a little bit ADHD going on based on some of the things that people are telling me? Now, that might kind of sound like I'm trying to suggest that everybody who comes in has ADHD, and that is not at all what I'm suggesting. It's not to say that if somebody has problems, that they probably also have ADHD. That's not, I think, the correct way to look at it. But I do think that it's extremely safe to say, and especially with Dr. Barkley's comment here, that people who have ADHD have other problems. Right. So what does everybody know about ADHD? They know that we are impulsive. They know that we can tend to be hyper. Anybody recognize the Mike Myers hypo skit from Saturday Night Live? They know that paying attention in first place can be kind of a difficult thing. So I've got Emmett from the Lego movie, his line on there where I think I got it, but just in case, tell me the whole thing again because I wasn't listening. That one kind of is, I think, pretty common way of thinking about ADHD, and also very distractible. Like something can kind of grab our attention. And I'm saying our. I have ADHD. I was a very late in my 40s adult before I ever had the diagnosis. Um, and something that I had always kind of suspected about myself and sort of assumed was true, but hadn't really felt a need to pursue it. And then when I think I had kind of a moment of like, I really think I need to figure this out. And I'll tell you, actually going through the testing itself to speak with somebody about whether or not I had ADHD, and to go through the testing, I had kind of a weirdly scary moment of, you know, of kind of thinking, if I don't have it, then then my conclusion is I must be stupid. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but there was kind of this sense of I think that there are a lot of things that have always been a little harder for me than made sense that they should be. I'm not, uh, you know, uh, not dumb, right? But there's always some things that seemed like this shouldn't be as hard as it is, and so the ADHD diagnosis kind of was almost a little bit of sigh of relief of, well, okay, almost like, thank God, because if I do, then that means that, that it's not about being unintelligent or something like that. It's that there is just something that does actually explain why things are a little tougher. Okay, so these are the things that we all know, that everybody knows about ADHD. This is the kind of stuff that is definitely within sort of, mainstream understanding. Okay. Here are some of the other symptoms of ADHD, right? I don't want to necessarily, read through all of these. You guys can all read, but we can definitely be prone to sort of thrill seeking, seeking a lot of dopamine or something, excitement, right? We can also be kind of impatient, right? Sometimes small talk for a lot of people with ADHD can seem sort of pointless. Things that feel kind of pointless are sort of maddeningly dull. If you're ever talking with an ADHD person, they're kind of like, okay, come on, let's get to the point here. Don't take it personal. That's just kind of more of a part of how we function. Um, we're definitely prone to procrastination, right? So impulsivity, I think, is a given. Most people recognize that, but I think it's also important to note the impulsive emotional reactions, right? So it's not just necessarily our actions, our behaviors that are impulsive. It's also those emotional reactions. They can kind of fly to a head before we have a chance to process. Here at Restorative Solutions, we kind of have a saying that um, people with ADHD experience everything in a 10, right? Where somebody without ADHD might have something happen and they have an emotional reaction that's something like a 4, right? Where the person with ADHD flies to a 10 before they have a chance to really think about how it's actually going to affect them. Um, Things like, memory, drifting, those rage reaction, I think also kind of fits in with that impulsive emotional sort of reactions. Uh, and the inconsistency with inattention, I think, is a bigger piece than just inattentive by itself, right? And we'll kind of get to that a little bit. Um, uh, Sometimes we can be a little intense, have a bit of an attitude, and we are definitely prone to being late a lot more than the rest of the population, because sometimes just that view of time doesn't always sort of make sense, or how procrastination fits into our view of time and getting to where we need to be in our responsibilities. Um, but it's not all bad either, right? There is actually a lot of good stuff that does come with having ADHD. I mean, a lot of us are pretty creative. Maybe because we've always kind of got something rolling around in the back of our heads that allows for a little bit of those eureka moments of like, oh crap. I mean, I know that I'm in the middle of a presentation, but I just figured out how to deal with whatever. That can happen. But hyper focus. So when I say that inconsistent attention, um, give me something that I'm passionate about, and I can probably focus on that better than somebody who doesn't have ADHD. On the other hand, give me something dull and boring, and oof, I'm probably not going to be there with you. Okay. Um, uh, as far as conformity, I think there's generally a little bit of a lack of patience that we're more prone to have about sort of, we do this because that's the way that things have always been done, and this is just the way things are supposed to be done. I mean, a lot of times we kind of want a real explanation, or something that it's got to make sense, right? I think we also and this was Dr. Edward Hollowell. He kind of pointed out that we can be excellent bullshit spotters, right? And so if something just seems off or somebody seems insincere, we might actually spot that pretty easily, right? Um, uh, so, there's a lot of good stuff too that actually comes with having ADHD, right? Um, I think a lot of times the kids who have ADHD that maybe seem so prickly and difficult, actually a lot of times are some pretty tender and sensitive kids. But living that way is really difficult. It kind of sets you up for possibly getting hurt. And so, these just because somebody wears their armor and kind of tries to keep themselves safe does not mean that you don't have a very sensitive kid underneath that, or even adult, right? We also tend to hate asking for help. You know, we do want to do things on our own, even to the point of that being a detriment or adding difficulty into our lives. And a lot of times people with ADHD can have just boundless energy. Um, I also want to throw out there to everybody while I'm doing this, I weirdly love being interrupted if I'm doing a presentation. Okay, so I think one of the difficult things about doing this on the computer as opposed to like with a crowd is uh, it's I think harder to speak up sometimes, harder to but I would actually prefer that. So if anybody has a question, if anybody even has something to add, whenever I bring up a point, please don't hesitate. Just go ahead and unmute yourself and start speaking up, and I would love to kind of dive into what anybody has to say. Okay, a phrase that I hate it. When he wants to pay attention. Okay, that uh, I hate that one. It's not about wanting to. Um, it's it's a big assumption but based on people not understanding ADHD. It's not about wanting to pay attention. In fact, a lot of times we do really want to pay attention. It's more often that, in certain situations we just feel like we can't or realistically cannot. Dr. Edward Hollowell, that I kind of mentioned before, he has a quote that, but such is the ignorance surrounding ADHD that people continue to cite a lack of effort for the cause of disorganization and poor attention. The biological fact is that in the absence of stimulation, they can't, not won't, they can't. He also goes on in one of his books to, I mean, this might even sound a little bit morbid, but I think it's dead on. He said that if you put a gun to the head of somebody with ADHD and say that they are going to die when they lose focus and they stop paying attention, it is not a question of if, it's a question of when. Okay. Fear, threats, they don't work. They don't actually get people with ADHD, and especially kids, to pay attention for very long. It's not sustainable. It can work for a little bit. And so I think that that's why people end up relying on it, but it is not sustainable. It will not work in the long term. And ultimately, what you end up with is a frustrated kid who views himself as a failure. Throughout history, people with ADHD have been beaten as the form of discipline for what's called their behaviors, and they still had ADHD. Maybe they were able to mask some of the inattention in order to avoid that, but we just end up with hurt kids. Okay. A lot of times, mood difficulties also accompany ADHD. Anxiety and depression are extremely common. So it is it's very common to see somebody with an ADHD diagnosis who is also taking a medication for anxiety or depression. So that can be one of those things of like, what came first, right? Is it that the anxiety is and depression piece are kind of added because some of the difficulties that come with anxiety, or I'm sorry, with ADHD, but also there's the piece of just the rumination and the constant, constant thinking, the constant doubting oneself. Just that mind racing tendency is a direct part of ADHD, that can also lead to some of these anxious thoughts, depressed feelings, and just kind of feeds itself. It can actually be, not even necessarily a response to how ADHD is affecting them, but just a part of ADHD by itself. The rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is a fairly new term and a fairly new understanding, but I think is really dead on. That comes with ADHD, especially by the time somebody gets into teens, and adulthood. Um, this is the piece that does come more from those environmental responses, right? So a lot of people who have ADHD, they grew up where peers, teachers, parents, lots of people in their lives were either saying or directly or maybe even just implying that they were stupid, that they were lazy. Lazy is a huge one, especially when it becomes procrastination. That they're just being stubborn, that they're being annoying. And I think that takes a real toll whenever somebody is told these things over and over again throughout their lives. They start to believe it, they start to internalize it, and they start to be really sensitive to the idea that somebody might be about to reject them. Often, kind of resulting, if you, sort of put your attachment lens on for a second, it's a lot safer to kind of put up your walls and protect yourself, and maybe even, show some of that attitude, or like, you can't hurt me kind of a thing, as a way of keeping themselves safe. Um, a lot of times, embarrassed parents blow up on their ADHD children, and you would really think that, considering that most of ADHD is highly heritable, a lot of times there's a family member, a lot of times there's a parent who has ADHD. You would think that those of us who, grew up with ADHD would just sort of know and be patient with our kids, and that is not always the case. I have, with my children who one definitely has the diagnosis, and one we're one we're the other we're pretty sure, but one has the diagnosis for sure. You would think that I would be an incredibly patient person with them, understanding where they're coming from, and that is not necessarily the case. Um, so, but the thing that I think is sort of by default told to people with ADHD is just try harder, right? Um, and that doesn't take into account that if trying harder was the answer, if it was the solution, then they would have already found it. They would have already found that. Okay. Um, okay. If you if you read this, the title of this slide with a bit of a beat, don't push me because I'm close to the edge, then congratulations, you're middle-aged like me. Um, all right. We are probably a lot more prone to arguing and fighting. And especially in childhood and in adolescent years, uh, these kids are going to be more likely to be challenging, to sort of fight back, to not just sort of like sit quietly and take it. If they are feeling attacked, that's not necessarily to say that adults are attacking them or trying to, but it can certainly feel that way. And so they are going to be a lot more likely to sort of challenge things, right? Um, so if you think about it, though, that's a lot more stimulating. It's it's always a lot more fun to fight with somebody than to try to focus on something that you're not interested in. But there's more to it than that too. I think, the another term that I'll say that I really don't like is attention seeking. Oh, he just wants attention. Okay, well, yeah, of course, kids want attention, right? And I know I've said he on multiple occasions. Girls certainly do have ADHD. They overall will tend to be a little bit less in your face than the boys. They will overall tend to have a little bit less hyperactivity. usually more geared towards inattention. But it's
Right.
only usually, right? I mean, the boys, the girls, they can all struggle with the same stuff. Um, so anyway, of course, people want attention. We all want attention. I think if we're being honest, every last one of us wants attention. We want to be paid attention to. We want to know that somebody's listening to us, right? And that if we can get a negative response, that's better than no attention at all. Um, uh, Another Dr. Holloway quote is the opposite of connection is not conflict, it's indifference. Okay. And so, the idea of somebody, not even acknowledging your existence is painful, right? I mean, legitimately painful from an attachment standpoint. Um, our connections to feeling disconnected to other people registers in the brain as the same place as physical pain, right? Um, so disconnected kids often become difficult kids. And so, I mean, if what they're wanting, if what they're needing is connection, we've got to make sure that they've got that, or they will go for the negative, regardless of what kind of difficulty it creates in their lives. Okay, so what in the world are we to do with these kids, right? So the first thing that we all need to remember is that there is a neurological difference with ADHD. Their brains are, it's not an exaggeration at all, that the to say that the ADHD brain is wired differently than neurotypical brains. They just are. It's different. It's not a rare difference at all. Um, I even saw where there's a suggestion that, you know, so there's a high, diagnosis rate of ADHD in the United States. And we are also a country of immigrants. And if you kind of think about the type of people who might be willing to get on a boat and travel across the ocean and take major, major risks for something that could potentially be high reward, that kind of fits with ADHD thinking, right? So who knows? Maybe maybe we really do have higher rates, because that's kind of what this continent attracted. Um, but also, if we think about, schools, if we think about just really a lot of the ways that we have structured our society, it is made for and, and very ideal for the non-ADHD brain, for the neurotypical brain. And so, um, it's not about effort. It's not about, kids not trying hard enough. Um, but it's also not an excuse. You're right. It's a reason. Um, if we can understand sort of the difference, that it's not an excuse, that it's a reason, then it does take into account that somebody with ADHD does have a responsibility to work as hard as they can to try to make their life better, to try to remove some of the obstacles. They do have a responsibility to work on things, but there are going to be some things that they may never actually be really good at, even if they really set their mind to working on things. And there are some things where they can make major improvements, and they can make learn some accommodations for themselves that can make their lives easier. They do have that responsibility for sure. I also would argue that they owe it to themselves more than they do to the general population, right? Because, it's about sort of making your own life easier, making your own family work a little bit better, making your own job more tolerable, right? But it's not an excuse, right? At the same time, it's not about just trying harder. Okay. So when we think about kids and we think about the limits that they have with a brain that is already struggling in an environment that really wasn't created for their brain. And then B, if we think about the fact that their brains won't even be done developing until they're 25, and the last piece to really get developed is that prefrontal cortex, which has, the executive functioning abilities, that is the very thing that they struggle with. Okay. And so I don't think it's entirely fair to put the responsibility on the kids to be the ones to make all the changes, right? It does need to be on the person who has better emotional regulation, who has more control. Even when those are the ADHD adults, we're still better off than whenever we were kids, and we're still better off than the kids themselves. And so it is really the adults who need to be the ones who are, working the hardest at making things a little bit better. Okay. Um, the what my opinion, the very best book that I've read on helping kids with ADHD is The Explosive Child by Dr. Ross Green. This is not a book about ADHD kids. And as far as the title, he's not even real crazy about the title. I think it was kind of like the publishing company really wanted him to go with that. It sort of implies kids that are, having major behavioral difficulties, but really his work, his book, if you read it, is just centered on the idea of helping kids who are having some trouble with something. Okay. Um, his book is based on two assumptions, and the whole book is really written about these assumptions. The first one is that kids do well when they can. Okay. Um, he says that if there are, if kids are not doing well, it's probably because they have some delays in flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, and emotional regulation and problem solving. Not because they're bad kids, not because they're inherently, problematic, but because they don't have the skills. So, and if they did have the skills, they probably would do better, right? His second assumption was is that if a kid is experiencing a problem behavior, it's because they're having an expectation that they're having some trouble meeting. Okay, and so that's why he refers to the problem behaviors instead of that as unsolved problems. And I think that while that's a subtle difference, it's kind of an important one because um, that kind of paints the way that we look at it instead of, problem behaviors, which sort of inherently, I think, uh, puts the problem on the kid's back, then if we view it as an unsolved problem, then this becomes more of an acknowledgement that there's something difficult going on that's not necessarily the kid's fault. He also makes another pretty important assumption, which is that a lot of times when we as adults um, imagine or come up with a reason for the why behind kids are doing certain things or why behind their behaviors, that we're usually wrong. And so let me get directly into this. Okay. Here is the typical adult assumptions behind the bad behaviors that we see, right? Okay. So a lot of times we will say that they are either manipulative, unmotivated, making bad choices, that they just have a bad attitude, or that there's mental illness involved, right? So let's kind of break these down. Manipulation. If you are good at manipulation, um, it requires being able to think ahead. It requires a substantial amount of planning, and you must be able to control your impulses. And kids with ADHD are not good at this, So we might call it manipulative, but I think that ends up putting kind of an ugly, nasty view on the why, right? And it assumes sort of negative, bad things. Maybe it is an attempt to manipulate, um, but it also is not exactly successful. So we really can't call it manipulation because they're typically not good at it, right? Um, if we think about, manipulation, it's a term that gets sort of a negative connotation, but to some extent, we all sort of do this, right? If I've got a day where my kids are out of the house and I wake up a little early and I get the kitchen cleaned up and remove all the clutter before I give my wife the like, hey baby, right? She knows exactly what I'm up to, right? And technically it's a form of manipulation, and probably, not one that she even really minds. Because I mean, also she knows she can tell me, yeah, sorry, Tiger, not today. Um, but in order to be able to actually be successfully manipulative, you have to have some skills, right? There is the sort of like narcissistic type of manipulation, but that also is different because while it may be successful, it leaves people feeling really icky. Okay, and that's how you know that you can sort of spot that. Um, so we call them unmotivated. But remember, Dr. Green said that kids do well when they can. So to take this a step farther, let's actually think about the kids who are doing well. The kids who are making fantastic grades, who are not getting in trouble, who make what we call positive choices. Okay, um, they're doing well because they can. They're not angels. They're not inherently, amazing kids, right? We give them a lot of credit and we're proud of them, right? But they have the skills to be able to do it. They're not just inherently good. They're able to do well. Okay. So the kids who are not doing well, they're not able. They don't have the same skills. Um, we say that they're making bad choices, but they don't always have the right. If they're using a different set of skills, then the choices are different, right? If you tell me that I need to drive a nail and you give me a Phillips head screwdriver and a wrench, right? Then I don't have the right tools to do the job properly, right? Even if it does get done, it's probably gonna be pretty nasty by the time it's done. Okay. We say that they have a bad attitude, right? But Dr. Green kind of spelled this one out. He said, maybe this is the product of having countless years of being misunderstood, overcorrected, overdirected, overpunished by adults who did not recognize that they lacked critical thinking skills. So maybe, yes, maybe they do have a bad attitude, and maybe they have a pretty good reason for it. Okay. Um, the other assumption is about mental illness. And while this isn't necessarily inaccurate, this is certainly accurate. We have to remember that the purpose of the diagnosis, the purpose of the mental illness is to give something to treat, not just as an explanation in and of itself, right? When somebody comes in to see me through as a client in my private practice, I'm going to be making a mental health diagnosis, right? Um, Partly making this because of insurance reasons. I'm partly making this because of my ethical responsibility. But it all kind of comes down to I have to know like what are we working on? Like what direction are we going to focus the treatment, right? That's the purpose of the diagnosis. And so we don't want to just sort of say, oh, well, it's mental illness as sort of a dismissive way that kind of says that it is what it is and people are stuck with these limits, right? Um, People can still develop their potential and work on things even when there is that diagnosis. Okay, so as far as Dr. Green's recommendations, the bulk of the book about how to deal with these unsolved problems, he says the first step is to write them out, write them all out, every last one of them, even if you have many problems that are listed. You write them all out, and then you also want to prioritize. You can't focus, if you got 20 unsolved problems, you can't focus on 20 problems too much, right? You want to focus on the top ones, the ones that seem like the biggest deal, the most urgent, and focus your effort on that. And he also argues that in doing so, you're actually going to be kind of paving the way for other problems to sort of deal with themselves or be easier to deal with later on. So he gives three basic plans for dealing with unsolved problems after we prioritize and figure out which ones we're going to work on. Plan A, this is not in necessarily an order of recommendations. Plan A is that the adult says, I know why the behavior is happening, and I'm going to make a plan for the response to the behavior, the consequences. Okay, and almost always this is frustrating for both the kid and the adult. And he also notes that the kids who are least capable of handling Plan A are the ones who get tons and tons of Plan A. But Plan A is sometimes necessary still. Okay, if you have a child who's about to dart into traffic, the adult makes the decision immediately based on what is necessary to keep a child safe about what needs to happen in that situation. So if we're talking about safety interventions, if we're talking about immediate threat to self or others, Plan A is sometimes a very, very necessary thing to go with. We as the adults sometimes have to step up and say, oh, this is what we're doing. Okay. But the danger is in using Plan A for everything. Okay. Plan B is utilizing our empathy skills and trying to be understanding with a kid. We want to collaborate with them about why they're having trouble meeting these expectations and what we're going to do about it. And the goal is a mutually satisfactory outcome. We don't want to just have the adult happy with it. We don't want to just have the kid happy with it. Everybody needs to feel like, okay, I can work with this. Okay. Plan C, now's not the time. We set it aside. Okay. That does not mean that you never get back to it. It just means for now. For now, we're going to say, okay, even though we've decided this is priority, dealing with it is not something that is appropriate for this very moment, second, or time of our lives. And this is something that we're going to temporarily set aside. And we're going to get back to it. Okay, so the question then inevitably, cynically comes up as, what about accountability? But if we really think about what this question means, what about accountability? It's punishment, right? Okay, and so the other assumption behind this question is that the punishments that we've put in place have not caused enough pain yet, and that's why the problem behaviors continue. Okay. However, kids with ADHD, in dealing with this type of thinking, please trust me when I say they have had enough pain. They're not having problems because there's not been enough. You don't have to keep trying to make it worse until they wake up. It really is the reason behind going under the assumption that they're doing the best that they can, that they will do well if they can, that they're lacking some skills, and that they're having some trouble meeting expectations. Really, when we think about what the term accountability actually means, then Plan B is perfect, okay? Because it really means that the kid and the adult work together to figure out what is the reason that they are having some trouble with something, and what do we actually do to fix it. Okay. If we just beat our head against the wall and don't come up with any other answers, then we're just showing that we don't know what else to do. Okay, so for the adults, what are the top things that we can do? Because yes, I am very intentional in saying that the biggest responsibility is on our shoulders as the adults, not the ones with the immature and not fully developed brains. Okay, so the top things that we can do is we can educate ourselves. Every one of you today showed up kind of knowing what we were going to talk about, and wanting to learn a little bit more about ADHD and how it affects people, right? The other thing that we can do is really try to just be understanding and recognize that it's not personal, and this can be incredibly hard, especially if a kid is, maybe showing what we call attitude, right? That sort of being really prickly. It can be really hard not to take that personal, especially when it seems like it's directed at us. We can also work on our own regulatory skills, right? That's another piece of that. Like, even if you have that ADHD, right, that's where your responsibility lies in dealing with these kids, is working on your own abilities to regulate yourself so that you don't fly off the handle at the drop of a hat, right? So that you don't jump up to a 10 with your kids whenever it should be a 4. And then we can also love them fiercely. And I do use this word love intentionally. 10 years of my school social work career was in Jersey, Jersey Community Unit School District 100. When I came in, Ed Settles was the superintendent, and he talked a lot about loving kids. He wanted everybody to have an attitude of loving kids. And I think that when we recognize that the term love is a broad term, and that's okay, that even though we've only got the one word to sort of sum up the same thing, this is still okay. We can still recognize that we We can love the young people that we work with differently than we love our own kids, and we love our kids differently than we love our parents, and we love our parents differently than we love our spouse or significant other. And we love them way differently than we love our neighbor, right? But that that this is kind of that sense of care, and we need to sort of do it fiercely with the kids who don't have enough of that love. Even though, yes, sometimes it will feel like trying to hug a porcupine. So does anybody have any questions? Anybody have any comments? Anybody have anything just helpful that they'd like to say that maybe I left out, or something I said made them think of something?
Nate, I realized as you were about halfway through that when you and I were chatting before the meeting started, I did not ask you like, how's your family? How's your kids? Any of that. My brain being full of ADHD made me just jump right into everything that we wanted to talk about. But you're so spot on with this because, and I hope your family as well. You're so spot on with everything that you said though, because I remember reading the definition years ago in actually in a novel that we were reading to my kids. ADHD doesn't make your brain not focus. It just doesn't tell your brain what's important to focus on. So it just tells you everything's equally important, which you were talking about the superpowers before on that slide. I mean, it's there's so many positives that you can take from this, but I also loved how you said society is I forget exactly how you said it, but it's society happens, mostly with people with neurotypical brains rather than ADHD brains. So it's kind of square peg into a round hole, but I feel like as we're recognizing and love what you said about the pilgrims, probably the high risk, high reward kind of situation. That's really true. I mean, couldn't you look back throughout history and look at people who did gamble big and it paid off? Think a lot of them had ADHD, probably. Chances are, if you look at, I mean, because I will say, and at least this is what I console myself with, maybe I got that, but, maybe we got a little bit of, smarts and perseverance with it too. It's just hard to always channel it in the right direction.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Also loved what you said about adults needing to adjust our mindset and our thinking about this too. And it's if we're working from a place of love, we can tell a kid that they're driving us crazy, but you know, they're right there too. At least you got your hand up. I'll let you go.
Hi. I am so sorry I missed a lot of this because I was getting some new computer today, but I can't wait to watch the recording because to be honest with you, I really needed this information right now. My 8-year-old right now is dealing with some challenges that we think might be signs of ADHD. Um, we we've taken him to like OT and stuff because we thought at first it was like maybe some sensory processing disorders. And they, came back and said, no, we don't think that's it. So now we're kind of leaning more towards ADHD, which wouldn't be surprising because my husband and I both are on the spectrum. So, but the I think the reason why I didn't lean so much towards ADHD in the beginning is because my oldest son has it, but the signs are so much different sometimes. And I realized that like they can be different in each child. My first son was more signs of like having a hard time focusing in school and really struggling in school. And now my second son, it's like he's really excelling in school, but he has a hard time like making friends and socializing. And then at home, it's very like he's very emotional. He has some outbursts. And so I love this information. I'm definitely going to have to go back and watch it because it's not only educational for me, but it's going to be educational for my husband, who has a hard time understanding this type of stuff. So I think it's going to be a good guide. I think you said don't take it personal, but it is hard sometimes as a parent
Oh,
because,
yeah.
especially when they're not showing signs at school, you're not getting any of that information from teachers. But yet at
Hmm.
home, you're seeing all of these things, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I just wish somebody else could see what we're going through because it can be exhausting, but you
Yeah.
also feel bad because you want to help support him and help him. So,
Well, what could be more personal than being a parent, right? I mean, there's everything about it is so personal. We create these children, and then it's our job to raise them up, and you don't know anything about how they're going to turn out, and we get so scared about every bit of it. Everything, like I don't think it's just a having ADHD kid kind of thing to constantly be worrying about the precedent that you're setting for every single decision that you make every goddamn day. It's just inherent to being a parent, right?
yeah, that's definitely, and being a parent, it's funny because I feel like your kids sometimes need different things. And so it gets very difficult whenever you're trying to respond to one child, but that parenting doesn't work on the other child. And so
Mhm.
it's like
Yeah,
you're always pivoting as a parent.
yeah, yeah. And I'm pretty convinced that if you line up 100 people with ADHD, you're going to see different presentation in all 100. I mean, it's the nature of the beast. It's why it's actually kind of a tricky diagnosis because there's also a lot of extremely successful people that did very, very well in school, but not because it was easy for them, right? Um, or you have sort of reactions to things, right? I mentioned about time blindness, right? I'm actually usually not late to things, but it's not because um, it's just something that I'm necessarily good at. It's because um, it's because running late to something there is like this huge amount of shame that I get flooded with of being like of letting people down of being seen as a screw up or something like that. That is not just that I'm good at being on time. It is something that I sort of feel like I have to do because of my own issues, right? And and sort of my interpretation of that. And so we can all be really good at some different things, even if we have the diagnosis. But sometimes it's actually because we kind of refuse to let ourselves do otherwise.
Elise,
So
you said on
anybody
the,
else?
oh, sorry. Elise, you just said on the spectrum a second ago. Were you talking about ADHD as being a spectrum? I wonder.
For my husband, yes. For myself, OCD.
Gotcha. I liked how you used that um, expression because and Nate, when you said line up 100 people and they would all present differently, I think so much of, I mean, ADHD, absolutely. I've always viewed as a spectrum because it's so changed. I mean, you have the umbrella, but my gosh, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, when you've met one person with it, you've met one person with it. I mean, because everybody presents so differently. And there are some people who, again, like you, Nate, you're the calmest guy I know. I never would have thought of you as having ADHD, but it presents differently in everybody, right? I could be the least calm person I know. And, same thing, but it is very much a spectrum, Elise. And I think the more understanding around that, the more we can reach our kids. Because I heard somebody when I worked at the alternative school, it was Journeys then, it's JCAP now. When I worked at the alternative school, so many kids were like, well, so and so was the only teacher who understood me, or they were the only person. And like, if somebody gets it, that's who the kids are going to, feel seen and heard by. I mean, that's important for all of us. I mean, Nate, you referenced his parents. I mean, an old friend of mine from East Alton said this is the closest we get to parenting. I mean, in this mental health and this education world, without taking kids home. I mean, truly, we're doing a lot of that same work in our buildings and our respective agencies. Um, I just think we need a ton more education around this, and this was super helpful today, Nate. Super.
Anybody else?
Hey, it's Bill Henson. I apologize. I'm driving in between schools here and backing up right now. So if you see my head bouncing around, it's not ADHD. It's just me trying not to get hit. But you know what? One of the things I see, and I work with my students, is especially my IEP students, I see ADHD as being a significant factor in what's hindering their ability to progress the way they want to progress in their academic endeavors. And We focus so much on trying to understand it and understand it's not a handicap, but it's just, it's something that we got to work on to help them to do better, and myself included. I always reference myself included because I'm one of those guys that, I've never been diagnosed except my own personal diagnosis of myself. That it it can be a challenge for my kids. It can be a challenge for me, and I let the kids know, you know what? There's resources. We're going to work through this. We're going to get through this, and we're not going to let it hold us down. We're going to use it as a way to excel and do better, if that makes any sense at all. So definitely, I notice it in my students. I notice it as a something that they struggle with, but at the same time, they're getting a better understanding. I'm getting a better understanding, and that's one of the reasons I chose this training today, is just to help me, equip me with more tools to not only work with myself but work with my kids.
Yeah, I think if we keep the focus on building those skills, right? And trying to be patient with the outcomes, recognizing that it's a long, long, very slow process of of seeing those things, and we're waiting on maturity. We're waiting on something to sink in. We're waiting on, the right set of circumstances, and that can be really frustrating, and it can be really hard to be patient. But I can say also from my own experience that there's not really a good alternative, because when we do get impatient, um, then we kind of lose sight of things. We get into a panic. We start parenting and operating from a base of fear, and that's where we usually make our worst decisions. Anybody else? Okay. If and please speak up if you're just kind of holding back, but I've got my email on here. That is my work email where I can be contacted. Um, I work at Restorative Solutions Counseling, and I have our website on here. If anybody is at all curious, we're happy to take referrals. We have had a very, very ridiculously long waiting list. It's kind of like a good problem from a business standpoint, a bad problem whenever your whole goal is to help people in the community. But we are also excited to announce that we've got some really great things happening with hiring coming soon. Even some very big things to announce about the business that are coming up. So lots of great things. Kind of keep your eyes open for what we're doing. We have a Facebook page for Restorative Solutions Counseling. You can watch that, and that we put our updates. We put the blog links on there as often as we can. And so if there's any way that we can help anybody here, or if anybody needs to make referrals, we are you know hoping to really have some great availability coming up very soon.
I'm excited to see what the next step is for Restorative Solutions. Nate, you guys have done a great job in Jersey County and beyond. We appreciate you. Um, Fabulous presentation today. You got a ton of great feedback in chat. Thank you everybody for being here today. Really terrific. Um, May 14th is our next and last meeting for the school year, folks. We'll get that sent out, as well as link to our to the YouTube video. I sent the PD hours out and CEUs in the chat, and I'll send those out again when I get this out via email. Nate, thank you so much again. This was fabulous. Really, really, really great info, and excited to be able to share this with the rest of the network.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here, my friend, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Nate. Thanks again, everybody. See ya.